Welcome back, intrepid adventurers and dungeon masters. Today we're going to be talking about how to use pre-made dungeons properly, and also how to really make your own dungeons. For this example and for this video, I'm going to be using Dungeons & Dragons as a base, but this applies to any game, any tabletop role-playing game that includes dungeons or pretty much areas where people can explore and walk around that have a bunch of different rooms on a sheet of graph paper, okay? Now, the reason I'm talking about this is I actually went and looked for this advice in a couple other videos about making dungeons and using pre-generated dungeons, and no one talked about that. And I guess I kind of understand why, because they were talking about the practical ways to create a dungeon. They talked about things like the stats. You want to make sure the stats are balanced for monsters in the dungeon. They talked about how to allocate loot. They talked about making sure it had a theme throughout the whole thing to make it more interesting. They would talk about, making the environment as realistic as possible, and also like how to make it epic and big and deep with lots of like secrets that can be uncovered, and all of that is great. But, and as a side note, this is almost a video to myself in the past because I fell into this trap a lot where I just used the dungeons as they were written. Alright, now everyone pay attention. You enter a room, and inside that room there are 3 doors, one to the left, one to the right, and one straight ahead. Inside the room, you see there is dirt on the floor, and some pillars holding up a stone ceiling. The room is 30 feet by 60 feet wide, and there are 3 troglodytes in the corner. They wake up as you enter, and you must fight them. You walk through the door and enter a new room. This room is 20 by 30 feet in width and height and size and weight. And it is very dusty in here. Inside this room you find that there are 3 troglodytes in a corner. One of them is sleeping. He wakes up. The other 2 were already awake, and they all get ready to fight you. Roll initiative again. You come into another room. Now this room is bigger than the other 2. It's a wide, spacious room, 1 million by 2 million feet wide. And inside this room, you see 3 sleeping and for this example, I'm going to be using the very first Dungeons & Dragons campaign that I ever ran, which was Tyranny of Dragons, Horde of the Dragon Queen. In here, there's tons of maps with a bunch of numbered rooms that just kind of show you the dungeon. Here's an example. In Chapter 3, or Episode 3, we have a dragon hatchery, okay? And in this dragon hatchery, there are a total of 13 rooms. Most of the rooms are connected, and each room has a little paragraph or a few paragraphs that kind of tell you what's in them and, how to go about the encounters people will find when they go in them. However, that is not the best way to use dungeons, in my experience and with my emphasis on storytelling, okay? If you're more of a gamer that enjoys the statistics, the power gaming, the looting, the dungeon crawling, then disregard anything I say in this video. I personally like the narrative and the storytelling aspect of Dungeons & Dragons and most tabletop role-playing games, which is why I felt like this needed to be said, because I started as a dungeon master. When I first started playing, I was a dungeon master. And my friends that I'd play with would tell me they liked almost every session. The exceptions would be whenever I used a dungeon. like a dungeon like this where I plotted it out on graph paper and just filled each room with some paragraphs of description, some monsters or traps or whatever, and some loot. Then there'd always be quite a few rooms that really didn't serve too much of a purpose, except as it makes sense that they're going to be here because I'm following the advice of make it as realistic as possible or make sure everything serves its purpose. But the fact is that if everything's supposed to serve the story, you want to build the monsters, the villains, the non-player characters, you want the characters to have an arc, you want the big locations to be filled with lore and plot hooks to move the story along. You want your items to be tied to impactful events so that the items themselves become more than just another sword, even if it's another +3 sword, naming it and having a bunch of importance put into it and into the characters, love of that item, right? Make them attached to it, emotionally invested in everything. That's the idea. You want them to be emotionally invested in what you're doing. The dungeons, the pre-generated dungeons that you have in Hoard of the Dragon Queen, for example, do not do those things. And so when you're looking at a dungeon in Dungeons & Dragons, because I have a few other books with these pre-made campaigns now, and I see that it's something that most of them have. And there's nothing wrong with that, but I think that it can be improved upon, or that when you encounter it, you should plan in advance. Because if you leave it the way it is, and people just walk in each room, and then you tell them what's in the room, they fight the thing or dismantle the trap, then they say, I searched the room, and you let them roll to search the room, and then they move into the next room. And every once in a while you tell them, all right, there's a door to the left, there's a door to the right, and there's a door straight ahead, or whatever. There's a closet kind of right behind you, It gets redundant. It gets boring. It drags the story on too long, and it becomes more of a grind. And some people like the grind, but not me. I'm not a huge fan of the grind, and it always feels flavorless when I'm running it as a dungeon master or when I'm playing it as a player. Because when we first started, my friends also fell into the same type of pitfalls that I also did. And over time, we've come to realize that, you can have dungeons, but the idea is to make them serve the story. And also to make them as little of... you don't want them to feel like a grind. You want to describe the room when they go in the room. That's the first thing I would recommend anybody do when they're playing Dungeons & Dragons. The pitfall would be to hold off on the descriptions until they get to the places they're trying to go, or until they can see everything, you don't actually describe it to them. But for the sake of making everything clear and quicker, obviously there are some places you shouldn't do this, but for the sake of speeding the game up, you should describe the place in general, and the rooms. If you're ever in a room that doesn't really have any purpose, just skim through it. You don't have to tell them, all right, you walk into the big living room, right? For example, you walk into the living room, and there's some couches, and there's a television. Obviously, this isn't D&D anymore, but you get what I'm saying. And there's nothing there. Like if they said, all right, I'm going to search the room, and there's nothing there, just move them along. Say, all right, you guys walk through the living room, you go up the stairs, you make it to the king's chambers, and in the king's chambers, he's asleep, and you start sneaking around. You want to make every single scene an event. They call it a scene, and there's a reason for that. You want to make each encounter something like, and ideally what you'd see in a film or an area of a book. You want each encounter to be meaningful. You don't just want another random encounter with some kobolds. There should be some type of meaning in every encounter, in every bit of loot, and in every single room people go in. And that, in my opinion, is advice I could have used, and is when I was younger, and is very important to the entire idea of what makes a dungeon interesting. Because you're going into unfamiliar territory, you're going into enemy territory, and as a dungeon master, you want to make sure that that enemy territory is challenging, is interesting, stays unique, and does not feel like you're playing Skyrim, where more than half of the dungeons you go into feel like you're doing the same type of thing over and over and over again. If it starts to feel that way, the dungeon wasn't necessary. And yeah, as always, the goal is to make sure everyone's having fun. So do what you think will work the best. This is just my opinion on how to make sure that everyone's having fun when they're going through dungeons. You don't have to go into every single room. Sometimes you don't really have to have them encounter every single monster that's listed. A lot of it is inspirational. That's the point. They're trying to inspire you. Once I got to a certain point in the Tyranny of Dragons campaign, I kind of did away with the main plot line anyway. We added a lot, and everyone had fun, and it was, yeah, it got very interesting near the end. But, and now we've carried that campaign over into a new campaign with all the threads from the first one continuing on. Yeah. So anyway, that's my bit of advice, my 2 cents, if you will. If you're new to the channel, hi, my name is Daniel, and I hope to help people with their game mastering. A lot of this is rambling, so, feel free to subscribe if you enjoyed the content. Leave a comment down below, let me know what you thought. Thank you for joining me, and I'll see you guys soon. Stay tuned for more videos on this channel. I haven't been uploading a ton recently, but I'm still here. Just wanted to let you all know. We are Legion, my friends. Deathstroke nigh.